The cowboy froze when he heard her voice through the storm, because she was supposed to be gone by sunrise. Rain hammered the canyon walls as Ruby slid down the muddy slope, her lantern swinging wildly in the dark. Below, floodwater crashed against the rocks. A frightened horse pulled at its reins, and somewhere beneath the ledge, a weak cough broke through the roar of the storm. Ruby dropped to her knees, her hands shaking from the cold as she called his name again. Then she saw something in the shadows that made her stop breathing for a second. If you're watching, tell me where you're joining from today. The winter of 1887 settled hard over Wind River, Wyoming. Snow lay in thin sheets across the open ground, blown into long white drifts by a wind that never seemed to rest. The mountains stood dark against the afternoon sky, watching over miles of ranchland and frozen creek beds. At Whisper Creek Ranch, Cal Bennett worked alone beside a broken fence post. The hammer rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Wood, iron, wind. That was most of his life now. 3 years earlier, there had been plans. A wedding, a future, a woman whose name still lingered in corners of the house he rarely entered. Then the drought came. Debt followed. And one morning she left with a banker from Cheyenne who could offer things Cal never could. Since then, he had stopped expecting much from people. The cattle needed feeding. The fences needed mending. That was enough. Or at least it had been. 200 miles away in Denver, Ruby Carter folded bread dough behind the counter of a small bakery near the rail yard. The smell of yeast and coffee filled the room, but it did little to quiet the knot in her stomach. Her step-uncle sat waiting at a table near the window. He had spent most of the morning drinking coffee he never paid for. "The arrangement's already made," he said. Ruby kept kneading. "I didn't agree to anything." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to agree. The papers are ready." The man he had chosen was nearly twice her age, a cattle trader with money, property, and no interest in whether she wanted the marriage. Outside, a train whistle echoed through the city. Ruby looked toward the sound. That was when she remembered the newspaper folded in her apron pocket. Later that night, under the light of a boarding house lamp, she read the advertisement for the 10th time. Cowboy seeks practical marriage. No romance expected. Serious inquiries only. The words were plain, almost harsh, yet somehow they felt more honest than anything she had heard in months. 3 weeks later, she stepped off a train into the Wyoming cold, carrying one worn suitcase and the last dollars she owned. The station at Wind River was little more than a platform and a freight shed. A tall man waited near the hitching rail. Dark coat, weathered hat, still as a fence post. Cal Bennett. He watched her approach without smiling. Snow drifted between them. When she stopped in front of him, he studied her for a moment. Then he said, "If you're looking for a happy life, you got off at the wrong station." Ruby tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. "I'm just looking for a place where nobody gets to sell my life for me anymore." For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth. Not exactly. But something. The next day, they stood in a small wooden church near the edge of town. The pastor spoke softly. 2 ranch hands served as witnesses. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. By noon, Ruby Carter had become Ruby Bennett. The ride back to Whisper Creek Ranch passed mostly in silence. The ranch sat beneath the mountains, surrounded by snow-covered pasture and bare cottonwood trees. It looked lonely. Cal showed her inside. A kitchen, a narrow hallway, a wood stove, a staircase. Nothing more than what was needed. "You'll have the room upstairs," he said. Ruby nodded. After he left, she carried her suitcase to the 2nd floor. The room was clean. Simple. Cold. As she unpacked, she noticed another door at the far end of the hallway standing slightly open. Curiosity drew her closer. Inside sat a bedroom untouched by time. A blue shawl folded over a chair, a hairbrush on a dresser, a framed photograph gathering dust. The belongings remained exactly where someone had left them years ago. Ruby stood quietly in the doorway. The woman might have been gone, but she had never truly left. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows. Downstairs, she heard Cal's boots crossing the floorboards. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Ruby wondered whether she had escaped one unfinished story only to walk into another. The room at the end of the hallway stayed on her mind all night. The blue shawl, the photograph, the dust-covered brush. None of it looked forgotten. It looked preserved, as though someone had left for a short trip and simply never returned. The next morning she came downstairs before sunrise. The kitchen was cold. Gray light filtered through the windows facing the eastern pasture. A coffee pot sat near the stove. Next to it rested a folded receipt from the general store in Wind River and a small sack of flour. Nothing else. No note. No instructions. Cal was already outside. She could see him through the frosted glass carrying a feed bucket toward the barn. Ruby tied her apron and started breakfast. By the time he returned, the smell of biscuits filled the room. He paused in the doorway. Snow dusted his shoulders. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then he removed his gloves. "Smells better than what I've been cooking." It was the longest sentence she had heard from him. Ruby glanced up. "What have you been cooking?" "Mostly beans." That almost made her smile. Almost. Days settled into a rhythm after that. Cal worked. Ruby worked. Neither asked much of the other. She discovered the ranch had been surviving rather than living. Curtains hung unevenly. One porch step shifted under weight. The roof above the well leaked whenever snow melted. None of these things were urgent enough to fix, which was exactly why they had remained broken. One afternoon, she found an old sewing basket tucked beneath a cabinet. The next day, the kitchen curtains had been mended. A week later, she cleared a patch of frozen ground behind the barn and marked off rows where vegetables could be planted once spring arrived. Cal never commented, but 2 mornings later she found fresh-cut boards stacked beside the garden area, enough to build raised beds. No explanation, no discussion, just boards. The same way the water bucket near the back door never froze anymore. The same way extra firewood somehow appeared before every storm. One evening she returned from feeding chickens and discovered a new cover built over the well. The rough pine boards still smelled fresh. She ran her hand across the wood. Cal was repairing tack near the barn. Their eyes met across the yard. Neither said anything. Neither needed to. The town noticed the marriage long before they noticed each other. Wind River was too small for secrets. By February, everyone had an opinion. Some were kind, some were curious. Others simply enjoyed talking. Ruby heard enough of it while collecting supplies at Henderson's general store. Most conversations stopped when she entered, then resumed after she left. She pretended not to notice. One Friday afternoon, she stopped at Miller's Cafe beside the feed store to collect a parcel. Through the window, she saw Cal sitting alone at a corner table drinking coffee. Across the room sat Wade Mercer, owner of the largest ranch in the county. A man whose vest always looked expensive and whose smile never reached his eyes. Ruby entered just in time to hear him speak. "Must have gotten lonely out there at Whisper Creek." Several men chuckled. Wade leaned back. "Or maybe you're finally trying to sell the place. Heard you've got yourself a wife and all." Cal said nothing. Wade continued. "Would have been cheaper just selling me the ranch." The laughter grew louder. Cal remained still. Only his coffee cup moved. Then Ruby noticed his hand. The knuckles had turned white around the handle. Not from fear. Restraint. The room waited. For a second it seemed something might happen. Instead, Cal set the cup down, placed 2 coins beside it, and walked out. Ruby followed a moment later. The cold air outside felt cleaner. He climbed into the wagon without looking back. The ride home passed quietly, yet something about the silence felt different, not empty, heavy. That evening, after supper, Ruby carried a lantern upstairs to search for extra blankets. A narrow storage closet stood beside the room that still belonged to the woman who had left. She opened the door. Inside sat boxes stacked against the wall. Old account books, receipts, a cracked mirror, and beneath a pile of folded linens, an envelope yellowed with age. No stamp, no address. Only one name written carefully across the front. Cal Bennett. Ruby hesitated, then slowly turned it over. The seal had never been broken. The paper inside waited silently, like a voice trapped for years. And before she could stop herself, she realized something that made her pulse quicken. Whoever had written that letter had expected Cal to read it. But somehow, he never had. Ruby stood alone in the storage closet with the unopened letter resting in her hands. The lantern beside her cast a small circle of light across the yellowed envelope. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved softly against the house. For a long time, she simply stared at Cal's name written across the front. Then she carefully broke the seal. The paper crackled with age. The handwriting inside was neat and steady. She read every word. Then she read it again. The woman who had left Cal had not written like someone who had stopped caring. She had written like someone running out of time. The letter spoke of illness, of regret, of a decision made in fear. Most of all, it spoke of coming back. She had tried to return. She had asked for one more chance. The date on the letter stopped Ruby cold. It had arrived months after the woman left, long before Cal's father died. Someone had hidden it. Someone had made sure Cal never saw it. Ruby folded the paper slowly. The house suddenly felt quieter than before. At supper that evening, she watched Cal from across the table. He ate the way he did everything else, without hurry, without waste, without complaint. The lamplight caught the lines around his eyes. For the first time, she wondered how many years of his life had been shaped by a lie. Several times she nearly mentioned the letter. Several times she stopped herself. The words refused to come. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Wind River. Snow melted from the lower fields. Mud replaced ice along the wagon road leading toward town. One morning, nearly 2 months after Ruby arrived, a stranger rode through the front gate. Ruby saw him first. She was hanging laundry behind the house when the rider dismounted. A heavy coat, gray beard, sharp eyes. The moment she recognized him, her stomach tightened. Her step-uncle, Earl Dawson. He removed his gloves and smiled. The smile looked exactly as she remembered. It never reached his eyes. "Found you at last." Ruby said nothing. A few minutes later, Cal appeared from the barn. The tension between the three of them settled over the yard like a storm cloud. Earl produced folded documents from his coat pocket. "She's obligated to return." Cal looked at the papers, then at Ruby. "What papers?" "Marriage papers," Earl replied. "Signed agreements. Debts owed." Ruby's jaw tightened. "The debt belongs to you." Earl shrugged. "Family debt becomes family responsibility." Cal's expression did not change, but Ruby noticed the muscle moving in his jaw, the same way it had in the cafe when Wade Mercer mocked him. The discussion moved inside. Coffee sat untouched on the kitchen table. The documents spread across the wood between them. Earl talked numbers, contracts, promises, obligations. Cal listened quietly. Then he stood. "I'll pay it." The room went still. Ruby looked at him. "You'll what?" "I'll pay whatever he claims you owe." Earl's eyes brightened immediately, but Ruby felt something else, a sting she could not explain. "No." Cal turned toward her. "No? I'm not for sale." "Ruby, you think this is helping?" His voice remained calm. "I'm ending the problem. You mean you're buying it?" Silence settled over the room. The clock above the stove ticked loudly. Earl watched from his chair with the satisfaction of a man seeing exactly what he hoped to see. Cal lowered his eyes briefly, then looked back at her. "I was trying to protect you." Ruby's voice softened but did not bend. "I know." The pause that followed hurt more than the argument itself. "That doesn't mean you get to solve me like a business transaction." For a moment, neither moved. Neither looked away. Then Cal stepped back. The distance between them felt wider than the room. Earl left before sunset, but the damage stayed behind. Days passed, then weeks. The easy rhythm they had built through winter slowly disappeared. The meals grew quieter. The porch remained empty after supper. The unfinished conversation hung between them every time they crossed paths. One evening, Ruby rode into Wind River for supplies. As she exited Henderson's general store, she noticed Wade Mercer speaking with Earl Dawson beside a freight wagon. They stopped talking when they saw her. Too quickly. Too carefully. Ruby continued walking, but she listened. Later that afternoon, she followed the wagon trail leading north toward county land offices. What she discovered there chilled her more than the wind ever had. Survey markers, new boundary maps, purchase records, whispers about grazing rights. Wade Mercer wasn't merely interested in Whisper Creek Ranch. He was buying land around it from every direction, one pasture at a time, one neighbor at a time. He was building a trap, and if he succeeded, Whisper Creek would eventually stand alone in the middle of land Wade controlled. That night, Ruby packed a small suitcase. Not because she wanted to leave, because she suddenly believed staying might destroy everything Cal had left. She set the suitcase beside the bed, then sat quietly in the darkness. Outside, spring clouds gathered over the mountains, and far beyond the ranch, thunder rolled through the Wyoming night. Ruby barely slept. The suitcase remained beside her bed. At dawn, she looked at it for a long time. Then she closed it. Not because she had changed her mind, because she needed one more day. One more chance to understand what Wade Mercer was planning. The morning air felt heavy. Even the horses seemed restless. By noon, dark clouds had swallowed most of the sky above Wind River. Cal and the ranch hands worked along the northern pasture, checking fences before the storm arrived. Ruby spent the afternoon in the kitchen, but her attention kept drifting toward the windows. The first rain arrived shortly after 3, cold, hard, driven sideways by the wind. An hour later, one of the ranch hands burst through the door. "The north fence is gone." Cal was already pulling on his coat. The rain hammered the roof. "The cattle?" Heading toward the canyon. Cal grabbed his hat. For a second, he looked toward Ruby. Neither mentioned the argument that still stood between them. Neither mentioned the packed suitcase upstairs. "Stay inside," he said. Then he disappeared into the storm. The rain intensified through the evening. Creeks overflowed. The dirt road toward town became a river of mud. Lightning flashed beyond the hills. The ranch house shook whenever thunder rolled overhead. Just after dark, another rider arrived, soaked, breathing hard, his horse trembling beneath him. "We can't find Cal." The room went silent. Ruby stared at him. What do you mean? He got separated near the canyon crossing. The ranch hands immediately began gathering lanterns, ropes, blankets, extra horses. Ruby looked toward the staircase, toward the suitcase waiting in her room. Then she looked back at the men preparing to ride. One decision erased the other. 5 minutes later, she was in the saddle. Rain struck her face like thrown gravel. The search stretched through darkness. Lanterns moved across the hillsides like distant stars. Hours passed. No sign of him. The swollen creek roared through the canyon below. Several times the men suggested turning back until daylight. Ruby refused. Something inside her would not let her stop. Near midnight, she spotted movement beneath a rocky ledge. A horse. Cal's horse. Alive. Tethered awkwardly between stones. She slid from the saddle and climbed down the wet slope. Cal. Only the rain answered. Then she heard it. A faint sound. A cough. She scrambled toward it. Cal lay beneath an overhang where falling rock had trapped him from escaping the rising water below. His face was pale. His coat soaked through. When he opened his eyes, they struggled to focus. For a moment he looked confused. Then he saw her. Not one of the ranch hands. Not a neighbor. Ruby. The woman who had been preparing to leave. The woman standing in the rain calling his name. She dropped beside him. Cal. The word escaped before she realized it. Not Mr. Bennett. Not Sir. Just Cal. His eyes widened slightly. She gripped his hand. Cal, don't give up. For several seconds, neither moved. The storm still raged around them. The creek still thundered below. Yet everything seemed strangely quiet. Because for the first time, neither of them was hiding anymore, and somewhere beyond the rain and darkness, the walls they had spent months building finally began to fall. The ride back to Whisper Creek Ranch took nearly 3 hours. The storm weakened before dawn. The rain became a steady drizzle, then only mist. Cal drifted in and out of sleep beneath a pile of blankets in the wagon. Ruby sat beside him the entire way. Whenever the wagon lurched over a rut, her hand found his shoulder to steady him. Neither spoke much. There would be time for words later. When they reached the ranch, Doc Harris from Wind River was already waiting. He examined Cal beside the kitchen stove. A bruised shoulder, a cracked rib, exhaustion. Nothing worse. You're lucky, the doctor said. Cal glanced toward Ruby. For a moment, his expression softened. Yeah, he answered quietly. The following days moved slowly. Spring sunlight returned. Water dripped from the eaves each morning. The swollen creek settled back into its banks. Cal spent most of his time recovering in the chair near the front window. Ruby kept the stove going, made coffee, changed bandages, read account ledgers in the evenings while the oil lamp burned between them. The silence no longer felt empty. One afternoon, she finally brought down the letter, the same yellowed envelope she had hidden for months. Cal looked at it for a long time before opening it. The room remained completely still. Only the ticking clock above the stove moved. Ruby watched his eyes travel across the page, then stop, then return to the beginning, again and again. When he finally lowered the letter, he stared out the window toward the distant hills. The afternoon light caught the lines in his face. Years of anger, years of misunderstanding, years spent carrying a story that had never been true. My father hid it, he said quietly. Ruby nodded. Cal folded the letter carefully. Not with anger, not anymore. With sadness. The kind that arrives after truth finally catches up. A week later, he walked back into town for the first time. That was when Wade Mercer made his final move. The railroad company wanted land, miles of it. Track would soon cut through Wyoming. Surveyors had already arrived. Wade stood to profit more than anyone, and Whisper Creek Ranch sat directly where he wanted expansion. The offer he placed before Cal was enormous. Enough money to erase every debt. Enough money to buy comfort for the rest of his life. Several ranchers urged him to accept. Even the banker from Wind River said it was the practical choice. Cal carried the contract home. That evening it sat unopened on the kitchen table. Ruby saw it immediately. Neither mentioned it during supper. Later, while washing dishes, she glanced toward the paper. "If you want to sell, you should." Cal looked up. She kept her eyes on the sink. "The ranch was yours before I came here." For several seconds he said nothing. Then he rose from his chair, walked to the table, picked up the contract, and tossed it into the stove. The paper curled black almost instantly. Ruby stared. "So that's your answer?" Cal watched the flames consume the last corner. "That's my answer." Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside, something settled quietly into place. The truth about Wade Mercer emerged not long after. One of the men he had hired during the storm came forward. Then another. Stories matched. Dates matched. Payments matched. The damaged bridge. The interference with grazing routes. The attempts to pressure neighboring ranches into selling. Within weeks, the county launched an investigation. Wade Mercer stopped appearing at the cafe, stopped appearing at the feed store. People no longer lowered their voices when speaking his name. For the first time in years, Whisper Creek Ranch was left in peace. Then, one Sunday morning, Cal invited the entire town to the old church. Nobody knew why. Rumors traveled faster than horses. Some thought he was finally selling. Others thought he planned to leave Wyoming. The church filled quickly. Ruby sat in the second pew, confused as everyone else. Cal stood near the front, a clean black coat, fresh shave, nervous enough to adjust his cuffs twice. That alone surprised her. When the room quieted, he cleared his throat. "A year ago, I married a woman because I thought I needed help keeping this house from falling apart." A few people smiled. Cal looked directly at Ruby. His voice grew steadier. "The truth is, the house wasn't what needed saving." Silence filled the church. Hell, I wasn't even sure I could trust anybody anymore. A few heads nodded. Everyone knew his story. Cal took a slow breath, then continued. "Happily, Ruby never gave up on me, even when I made it difficult." Soft laughter rippled through the room. Ruby lowered her eyes. Cal stepped forward. "A year ago, we signed papers." He reached into his coat pocket. "But this isn't about papers." He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple gold ring. The entire church seemed to stop breathing. Cal's eyes never left hers. "I thought I needed someone to keep this place standing." His voice softened. "It turns out she was the reason it stood at all." Ruby felt her throat tighten. "Ruby Carter. Will you marry me again?" A tear slipped free before she could stop it. The answer came easily. "Yes." The church erupted in applause. Somebody laughed. Somebody cried. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Ruby felt completely certain she was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, Whisper Creek Ranch looked different. The garden stretched along the side yard. Fresh paint covered the porch railings. The barn doors swung smoothly on new hinges. Children from neighboring ranches often crossed the pasture to visit. Laughter drifted through open windows, and every evening, as darkness settled across the Wyoming hills, a small oil lamp glowed from the kitchen window. The same lamp Ruby had lit on lonely nights when she first arrived. Only now it meant something different. It was no longer a light against loneliness. It was a light waiting for someone to come home. And whenever Cal returned from the fields and saw that warm glow across the pasture, he always smiled before opening the gate. Because some people spend years searching for a home, and some discover that home was waiting for them all along. At Whisper Creek Ranch, beneath the Wyoming sky, two people who had once settled for survival finally found something far better. They found each other. And maybe that's why this story stays with us long after the last light goes out in the ranch house window. Because if we're honest, most of us have had a season in life when we felt a little like Cal, carrying old hurts so long they started to feel like part of who we were. Or maybe we've been like Ruby, standing at a crossroads with nowhere left to go, hoping that one more door might open before all the others close. Imagine yourself sitting on that porch as evening settles over the Wyoming hills. The wind moves through the grass. The day's work is done. And beside you is someone who didn't arrive in your life with promises or grand speeches, but stayed when staying mattered most. Sometimes healing doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a shared cup of coffee, a repaired fence, a lamp left burning in the window, a person who chooses to remain when life becomes difficult. Maybe that's the real gift of a second chance. Not getting a different life, but finally seeing the value of the one standing right in front of you. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where in the journey you connected most with Cal and Ruby. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, hope, and the unexpected ways people find their way home, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next horizon, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep a light burning for the people who matter.